All right, we're back. Another edition of The Climb. One of my longest, deepest, best friends in the world, Frank Venus, joins us. Thank you, Frank, for joining. I appreciate it, man.
Thrilled to be here. Thrilled to chat. Thrilled to chat.
Absolutely. And chat we do. I'm glad we could take it to the airways instead of offline. So appreciate that.
Yeah, of course.
Um, I think we were talking in general before the podcast of how you have a unique perspective. Um, I have been diagnosed with bipolar disorder for 10 years. A lot of people know that. I openly speak about that. And you have been there for every single minute. Um, that's unbelievable experience as a friend. And as a 19-year-old, that's experience of growing up fast with someone that's dealing with something. But even your brother comes on the airways of The Climb and talks about his own struggles. So,
Mhm.
I mean, God, and if I remember correctly, there was a point in time that you wanted to be a psychiatrist. So
Yeah,
there
yeah.
was a point in time.
Yeah. Well, it turns out I'm just not a very good student, so I think med school was out of the cards for me. But
You and me both. Once I got a D in bio, it's like, all right, this chiropractor thing, that's out the window. I got to figure out mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, was the only thing I retained.
yeah,
So,
exactly. It wasn't the field of mental health that was the issue. It was
yeah,
getting through the classes that was the issue. But we're here.
absolutely. I think we all can relate to that. We'd all be, doctors and such if we had
Yeah.
an easier way of learning it.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I mean, do you want to give you a little bit? I know that's a little intro for you, but you've spoken, in a Team Garbo video, your stance on mental health in general. But you want to give from your perspective, maybe, how it was brought into your life and how you've kind of dealt with it, whether it's supporting others or yourself.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. Like you said, it's a it, they say regularly, mental health, it impacts everyone, right? It's not just if you're going through something, it's your friend is going through something, your family's going through something, and that's
Mhm.
very much has been my case for a long time, for as long as I can really remember. So,
Yeah.
it's true, right? You experience in different ways. So whereas I certainly haven't been, haven't had a clinical diagnosis for anything in particular. It's just been something that's been a part of my life through loved ones, right? Such as
Mhm.
yourself, that I'm just always a part of. So I think it's been an interesting learning curve
Mhm.
for me. Um, and it's very close to a lot of what you talk about a lot, regularly. It's not even learning so much from acceptance, because when you're really close, when you're in this situation like us, right, where you're really close, there's the stigma, but it's kind of easy to get past the stigma, right? Like, we're best friends. It's like, all right, you you have a diagnosis for whatever it may be.
Yeah.
It's not like that changes anything almost immediately. It's just kind of like, oh, okay, so what now? Like, it doesn't
Mhm.
really impact the friendship. So the stigma isn't the issue in these, at least in our case, in these close situations. But what becomes the challenge, is like the dynamic, and how do we address it? How do we talk about it? We'll probably get into this in a lot more detail, but that's been something that's
Yeah.
been really eye opening for me, as to how to have these conversations and talk about these things that are really heavy for your loved ones, and then also how that evolves, because you're not the same person you were 10 years ago, and same thing with, my family and other people that we know that are going through their own stuff. So I
Yeah.
think that's been a really interesting, from that like friend perspective, that I think a lot about, and I feel like I'm constantly learning. But yeah.
Yeah. And that's definitely like part of it, right? Like you're either going throughout life and going through challenges, and some of them can go good, some of them go bad, but you got to be learning the entire way.
Yeah.
And I think that was obviously the acceptance came second nature,
Yeah.
which was great,
Hmm.
but the patience and the patience to that goes beyond support and learning that I think is not most people have at an age of 18, 20,
Hmm.
21 that you showed in spades, and then can repeated that with others in your life too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's something that doesn't, it's tough to say, because I'll say it here, and because I know that you trust me and you understand the kind of the end result, but it's not always easy, like a lot of times, like even through our dynamic and when you were initially diagnosed, and obviously with my brother, as any, siblings fight regardless, and then
Yeah.
you add in a different layer of other things, it just creates a dynamic where a lot of times, even myself, I had the thoughts of it would just be a lot easier if I just didn't, like, I just kind of ignored it and, like, moved on, lived my own life, did, just kind of like distanced
Mm.
and just ignored it, right? So I think that's something that patience is not always easy, and I think that was something that it I'd be lying if I said I'd never had the thought of, wow, this is a lot. Like, do I really feel like dealing with this, or do I really want to think about this or talk about this?
Yeah.
You know, when you're, well, like you said, when you're 18, 19, and I'm interested in, I just want to go hang out with friends, have a good time, like laugh. But
Yeah.
you have to sometimes have some heavy stuff, and I think in the big picture, this goes to the team cargo thing, right? In the big picture, it's always just the reminder of like, well, these are my, like, at the end, I love you, I love my family, and you want to show up for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And it almost, in a certain instance, puts you in a situation where you're forced to put on big boy pants, big girl pants, and grow up a little bit faster than others.
Sure.
Um, but I know patience was a part of it, and I think anyone that is close with you, friends with you, or acquaintance with you, know that you're probably one of the more approachable people to have in life, and to have a conversation around anything. And I
Hmm.
think that is comforting.
Hmm.
You have that comfort about you, whether it's a fun, light, playful conversation, or man, we just got deep. That was a deep
Hmm.
conversation, whether it's about motivation or
Yeah.
challenges, stress, you name it. One thing that like put me in my seat essentially when I was speaking with students a couple years back or a year back was they asked me, how did my friends react?
Hmm.
What did they do? How did they know? It was the only question. I said, I don't know. Wasn't me. I'm fortunate because I know others don't have friends like that, but that isn't me. So maybe kind of like talk granularly about those situations that you faced, and kind of what gave the character that you have today, the continuous growth.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's an interesting question in itself of how did you know? I mean, your situation is probably a little bit more, uh, I would say, extreme. So it's how do
Mm.
you know is a little bit more obvious because
Yep.
it's really on the nose. If for anyone that's experienced someone in a manic episode, it's a little bit more obvious. That being
Mhm.
said, the lead up, the build up isn't so much, right? And I think that's where, without that discussion, and where I'll eventually go with this, is just time of working with your loved ones and friends of how
Mhm.
to communicate these things. What are the signs? How do we talk about these openly? Because until you do it, it's not so easy to just, even your best friend, to say like, hey, are you feeling okay? Like, how are
Yeah.
you? How are you doing? And and not just like, are you having a good day, but like, how are you actually doing, and getting to that.
Mhm.
That's a hard conversation to have, let alone you're talking about high schoolers, right? Let alone a 16-year-old to be able to go to their friend and ask, like, are you feeling really sad, like deeply sad, or are
Yep.
you, or do you feel whatever it may be? So
Stressed, overloaded, all that
yeah,
stuff. Yeah.
exactly. And I think that's where it certainly wasn't just me on my own, on myself, by myself, right? And I think that's where you constantly preach like your support group system and the group of
Mhm.
friends. Like, it was all of us. It was constantly like the talking, not behind your back in a mean way, but a lot of just hard conversations. Like, what do we do? What are you thinking? What are you doing?
Mhm.
How do we address this? Because I think that's, I don't want to say it's needed, but it was, that's what kept everyone kind of like, okay, what you're like, almost keeping each other like, we're all in this. What do we do? Like, how are
Mhm.
you handling it? Um, and then obviously you've been great about being really open with it, talking, and this is, verbalizing what you need. So I think it's like it needs all, you kind of need all those components, but from the bare minimum, it's just about, are you like having that a really hard initial conversation of like, what's going on? Like,
Yeah.
you're clearly not quote unquote normal.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's you said so many great things that I think, people probably don't think about at a young age. of that like second level thinking, like, hey, why are they acting like this, or what's going on, like what's
Hmm.
happening in their life to make them feel a certain way. Because as you said, like the manic episode comes fast and hard,
Hmm.
but the times leading up to it look pretty normal.
Hmm.
And until you get to a level of 10 years of working with my friends, communicating with my friends,
Hmm.
communicating with each other, letting both of all of our guards down and being vulnerable with each other,
Hmm.
accountability, like that's when you can realize that it's like, all right, like he's on his shit, or all right, he knows what he needs to do, but like let's, we always have to keep an eye on it. Like he's
Hmm.
in a stressful period of time, and you could say that with me. You could say that with any of our friends. Say it with
Oh,
even
yeah.
yourself too.
Yeah.
That.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, and then thinking about going back to your original question around like the specifically the youth and friends, and how do your friends know? How did they handle it? And it's there's unfortunately there's no one perfect answer other than I think it's just like accept the fact that it's it's going to be uncomfortable. You
Yeah.
just like kind of get comfortable with the uncomfortable and
Mhm.
know that it's not forever. It's just it's a new dynamic, and you kind of have to work through having those initial conversations. And like I said, and we're not talking about adults. If you're talking about high schoolers who are
Yep.
16, 17, 18, they're gonna that's hard to get there. So it's kind of it's okay. Like accept the uncomfortability of it. And I think also part of that is if for those who may be going through something is the other part of that is like feeling more comfortable to say like, hey, I'm not feeling great. Like or something's
Mhm.
up,
Yeah.
and that kind of helps. That certainly would help your friends or loved ones kind of cue them onto, oh, something's up.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a two-way street. And that's friendship. It should
Hmm.
never be one way.
Yeah.
And, I hope I show not just in my words, but my actions that, how much you mean to me and
Hmm.
how much all my friends mean to me.
Hmm.
With, whether that's just, my loyalty or, friendship and just the way I speak upon everyone. But
Hmm.
there came like a certain point that like I feel as if I had no idea what I was doing. If shit went bad, I called everyone. Like it felt like a cry for help, just like I don't know what to do, yada yada.
Hmm.
But then we, fast forward to like maybe a year ago around this time that I was having conversations with you, Al, Christian,
Hmm.
the Ardleys, and all those conversations were different. They were facilitated different. They were brought up at a certain time. They were played to the strengths of Frank, played to the strengths of Al,
Hmm.
and I had to work hard on how to communicate with my friends because not everyone is going to react the same way and not everyone's trained to, you know?
Well, yeah. So I have to cut in because I think that's a really important piece when you're thinking about like the friends of someone who may be going through something, or how do your loved ones handle it. It is it's really hard to, and we've talked about this at length, right? But it's really hard to accept sometimes it's not necessarily your responsibility to solve the
Mm,
issue
yeah.
as much as it is to just kind of be there
Hmm.
and like offer the support. And because that's a great, so what you said about the training, right? It's like, yeah, exactly. These aren't trained professionals. These are your friends who care about you and
Yep.
want to help. And I think, especially when you're thinking about the youth and maybe, individuals who don't have necessarily a lot of responsibilities, that it's very easy for them to feel like almost the responsibility of saying like, oh, like, this is my best friend, I need to try and help them. It's like, well, yes, but you're accept the fact sometimes that you're not, you're really the best thing you can probably do. And correct me if I'm wrong if you feel differently, it's like is just be there. And
Yeah.
then your friend, your loved one, they'll kind of help guide, and whether verbally or not,
Mhm.
what's really needed from you. And it's not just about like, oh, I don't know how to solve this. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
you probably shouldn't know how to solve it for the most part.
I was just talking about this concept of motivation with Christina that I'm pretty
Mm-hmm.
passionate about. And, having an empowered mind to, overcome life challenges or just things that come across your table. But there's like two forms of motivation. There's extrinsic and intrinsic. And
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty obvious. Extrinsic is these things that are out in front of you, whether, you want to talk about your career or, extrinsically you have friends motivating you and this and that. But at the end of the day, that motivation can only go so far.
Mm-hmm.
That there's this internal dialogue that you need to have within yourself to intrinsically motivate you to be the person you want to be or climb whatever mountain you have in front of you. And
Mm-hmm.
there's only so much that Frank can do to help AJ. There's only so much that AJ can do to help Frank.
Yeah.
And we had your friend that you met, good friend in college, Mike Herfler, on the podcast. We'll be
Mm-hmm.
dropping before this episode, but he talked about it that, in layman's terms, that like you can't help someone that doesn't want to help themselves.
No. Yeah.
And they will have to be the agent of change. And I
Mm-hmm.
think I'm very fortunate, and that's why Team Garbo is a thing, because I'm very fortunate to have people around me. It certainly took a village,
Mm-hmm.
but it also took the man in the mirror. I had to look myself in the mirror and realize that I was and am only going to be the one to decide my future
Mm-hmm.
and control it. So there's only so much you could do. And it's a constant reminder for people that really care and have huge hearts. And I know so many of them in my life, and me being one of them is a hard lesson to learn, and still is, that like you have to be the very best person you can be for yourself. You can try to help others,
Mm-hmm.
but at the end of the day, they are the ones that have to be those people that are going to make the change for themselves. So I
Yeah.
think,
Yeah.
you said that pretty adequately before too.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's just about, it's like, be there to support, and support doesn't necessarily mean do the work. It just means like kind of walk alongside you as your, whoever that is, your loved one, your friend that's going through whatever it is they're going through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think just from the person that was going through it, you don't want someone to like do everything for you,
Mm-hmm.
but it's those things that are like, it's great. Obviously the rah support you there for you, but it's the things that are unsaid that speak the loudest of, hey man, look how much they've been, how long, how much they've done, how much they've said, all the things they haven't said. They're just being there and supportive, and it's things that I think people need to not take for granted.
Mm-hmm.
Friendship and even small forms of friendship, because everyone's
Mm-hmm.
different. I'm not Frank Venus. Frank Venus is an AJ. We have different traits. Just because I do something differently doesn't mean I love you more or less, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think, when I had those students ask that question, like, well, what did your friends do? And I knew in my head, I'm like, well, I don't really know, but I know I would have done the same thing for them.
Yeah,
And
and I don't think anybody has a doubt.
yeah.
And that's why I'm bringing up the ownership part of it a little bit, because I think sometimes like those questionings come from, I think, at least I would imagine, right? You remember what it was like to be a teenager.
Mm.
It's being uncomfortable was probably the worst thing ever,
Yeah.
right? Like, and so it's the fear of, well, like, what did they do? Because it seems, one, embarrassing to say anything, it's uncomfortable, to talk and to bring it up and all that stuff, right? So I think the fear of that uncomfortability is kind of, might prevent some people from doing anything or helping, or
Mm.
like I said, it sometimes, you're going to eventually run into that, like, this is like, I
Mm.
wish I didn't have to deal with this. I wish this, why, well, this isn't my problem. Why do I have to deal with it? It's like, well, it's not quite that's your perception of it, right? But that's not actually the case. You're walking alongside a friend. They're the ones that are going through the, like, doing the work, going through the, the healing or whatever it is.
Yeah. And then like hopefully like the common theme of these podcasts and the climb is just that there's you could tell that there's a lot of people coming on the podcast that are close to me, and it's continuing the conversation, not
Mm-hmm.
just about mental health, but well-being and, overcoming obstacles and things like that, where it does take other people. And, as we grow as a society, and the landscape has changed drastically from 10 years from now in a good
Mhm.
way. But one of the other themes of Team Garbo is to normalize the stigma behind it,
Mhm.
to normalize the conversation, the climb. Let's keep the conversation going on. Is it uncomfortable? Hell yeah. Was it way more uncomfortable 10 years ago? Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Oh my God, yeah. It's always going to be uncomfortable, but sometimes those uncomfortable conversations, those uncomfortable positions in life kind of bring the best results, the most
Yeah.
healthiest results too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, two things kind of get combined there of the thinking about the youth and students, but then also thinking about like that 10-year gap. Like, it's also really valuable about having these conversations and going back, kind of diving into that uncomfortability a little bit is, I think, you've talked about at length, right? Your experience feels, it was very sudden. It was like very intense and very quick, right? It
Yeah.
happened out of nowhere, and it was the most intense version of the thing that we're talking about, right? Or one
Yep.
of the, it could, versus in a lot of cases, it's a bit slower and not as obvious, like we were saying, to kind of onset. So you're thinking, you're what may seem like a pretty straightforward, easy, I would say easy existence, but good, comfortable life. And as you get older, right, you're thinking about these students. They don't have a ton of responsibilities at 16,
Mhm.
and then as life starts to hit them, and it's feel like we're at that point now too. We're further enough out of school. We're like adults now, and it's like, oh wow, life is hard, right? We're
Yep.
newly married, home, dog. You're doing the adult thing. It's like, wow, it starts to sink in, and you realize, oh, these conversations are important because you start feeling the pressure from all different angles, and it's very
Yeah.
obvious how everybody, no matter how different your circumstance is, can this it starts to weigh, no matter how insulated you think you are.
Yeah. I mean, it's never going away. A lot, like you said, I've said it before on here that, like, yeah, 1 in 5 people are diagnosed with a mental illness. And I guarantee that's an old stat. I'm sure it's even higher
Hmm.
of diagnoses.
Yeah,
But I can guarantee 5 out of 5 are impacted by it.
yeah,
And
yeah.
whether that's directly or indirectly. And even, with your story, you had a sudden experience with me. You've supported a brother that had a slow burn of figuring things out that, like you
Hmm.
said, like that's granted. Like I think dangerous is part of my path. It's a dangerous, unsafe, and unstable environment. But
Hmm.
dealing with any or supporting anyone that's going through any type of anxiety or depression, these silent like killers, like
Hmm.
it's tough too.
Hmm.
And kind of like with your experience and almost becoming a psychiatrist, uh, you know,
Don't
I,
lose the almost. Let's really de-emphasize the almost.
almost, man. I mean, listen, I almost cracked backs.
Yeah.
Um, but like all of that, and because you were open at such a young age that you were constantly growing and you're constantly talking and working on yourself, being a better person for yourself and for others, brought you to a point where this past year, like you mentioned, where life gets real
Hmm.
and you put it on the table for yourself, recognizing things that you may have not experienced ever before. And that
Hmm.
shows like a lot of maturity from you and a lot of things that people might just suppress for years. And I think you're a great example of normalizing the conversation, but realizing that, hey, listen, this could show up for anyone, anytime, anywhere. And, you have to deal with it, accordingly.
Yeah.
So, you got to give yourself some credit too, because I think a lot of people would have struggled for even longer to even recognize that, hey, this is a little bit more challenging than expected.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think, yeah, you said that 5 out of 5 are impacted, and I think
Mhm.
that's a key perspective because you're like the tactics and the strategies and a lot of the, like you're talking about motivation and mindset, a lot of the stuff that you're constantly preaching and talking about, like it's useful to everyone. It's not like, oh, you don't have bipolar, it doesn't really apply to you. It's like it's very much applies to
Oh, yeah.
everybody. And I think
Mhm.
that's where if you aren't directly going through your own healing process and you're kind of in more of the, sideline perspective of a lot of like the mental health kind, I would like someone like myself, right? That it's mostly your friends and family that you're witnessing and you're supporting, but you don't necessarily feel like you're going through anything internally.
Mm.
You kind of take a lot of those things for granted. You hear about the strategies and the self-care and you're like, oh, well, that is good for them. That's great because they
Yeah.
need it. But you forget, you're like, oh, look, I need to be doing that too. Because as soon as things get hard, you start realizing it's like, oh, I really need, for me personally, this year was so challenging. And I realized like, oh, I need more structure. I've
Yeah.
talked a lot with my wife about it. It's like, well, yeah, I need to have more organization, like just with my thoughts. How do I approach
Mhm.
it? How do I think about things? I'm just letting stress and conflicting priorities just kind of drown my just existence. So it's,
Yeah.
all those things that you're constantly working on preaching, it's valuable to anybody. Like
Yeah.
I think about it every day.
Yeah. I mean, that's such a great point. I was just on the phone with someone about adding more structure to my life and rejoining a workout facility. So it's ironic that you mentioned that. And
Yeah, very nice. Very nice.
yeah. But I think you are right. I mean, I have said that, but I agree with, like, this isn't just biohacking mental health. Like, this
Hmm.
is well being. Like, this is traits that, stuff that I've learned and that you've learned through sport or psychology.
Hmm.
Sports psychology and performance psychology, I always laughed at being like, oh my God, this is just life psychology. Like, this is just good, practical stuff that actually, like, a lot of like Stoics talk about in the ancient times. It's like, man, they got it right like 2,000, 5,000 years ago. Like, they should just focus on what they're saying. It seems a lot more simple, and they didn't even have like a cell phone.
Yeah, right.
Um, but I have to like admit that not many people have recognition like you. And maybe like speak to that a little bit more. This past year, that when did like the light switch come on for you, and what was that like internal conversation that it's like, all right, I do need to bring Kelly into the loop here. That's my person, and she should know I got to bring her in. Like, something's not right.
I mean, it's funny. It's, you're somewhat hypocritical, right? I was very much aware that I didn't feel good.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was more of an awareness this year was when it was just it was I don't really want to say an argument, but it was just, Kelly, my wife, was just like said something that really kind of, she was like, you're just not really present. I just don't feel like you're present. You're just I can tell that you're constantly, your mind's elsewhere. And I was 100%. I was like, yes, like you're actually
Yeah.
right. It is, because I'm
Well,
just
first you're
constantly
probably
thinking.
like, what? What'd you say?
Well,
Like,
yeah, of
what
course.
are you
Initially, it's
doing?
always like it's always like just, it's I'm
Little
sugarcoating.
small
It's
jokes.
like
Like,
very defensive. Yeah, it's very defensive. Very much like, yeah, like wait, hang on, like, well, because I got this and that, and I'm gonna think about this. But then when you actually like say it all out loud, you're realizing like, oh well, you know, it's not really like it's not a good excuse. It's
yeah.
just it's because I was struggling to turn off work, to turn off
Hmm.
whatever it is, to worrying about the dog or worrying about the house or worrying about a lot of work. It was mostly work, right? But
Yeah.
so and the that kind of made me really think about like, oh man, you're right. Like I started immediately. I could think of at least 10 different examples when she said that. Like immediately, I was like, yeah, I can picture myself being on a walk with the puppy and her, and just knowing in my head like I'm thinking about work. Like
Yeah.
I'm not even there. Like I'm
5
thinking.
blocks go by and you didn't even realize that you were
Yeah,
walking. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I think that was it. Wake up sounds probably more like too extreme, but it was very much like the moment of like, oh wait a minute, I need to think about this differently because my priorities are way out of whack. Like
Yeah.
I understand the value of work and the job and everything, but when I realized like if you were to list all like the like 5 things, like work, my family, the dog, whatever, and like I had to say, all right, you had to lose one. Which would it be? Like work would probably be the one I'd be like, yeah, who cares? I don't,
Yeah.
I can find something else where I can get by. Like I don't want to lose all that other stuff. But it was completely different than what I was doing and how I was like my mindset. So I was like, oh man, I really gotta work on this. And then once I kind of started digging under
Mhm.
that, like picked up that rock and started digging there, it became like a real eye opener. Like I realized for the first time, I was like, oh wait, I think I'm experiencing anxiety about this that I
Yeah.
had just ignored. Right? I thought it was normal. I didn't think anything of it until you started really kind of poking at it in your own mind and realizing, thinking a lot of through all of the experiences that we've had and conversations we've had and realizing, oh wait a minute, like I think like, this isn't right. Like I'm
Yeah.
clearly not like I need to realign what I'm what I'm focusing on and how I'm reacting to these situations.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's so many. Like, it's amazing how many common things I hear from everyone I'm in communication with, especially with our. I mean, God, professionally, we've had so many overlap of
Mhm.
frustration and things of that nature, and that we're not the only one. Like, I know of just offhand, like 2 other people,
Oh
same,
yeah, yeah.
even more. And one thing you said there, like I think I've mentioned this before about like priorities and like listing what's most important to you.
Hmm.
But it's interesting where our energy goes.
Hmm.
Because I bet if you wrote down a list of 3 things the most important to you, yeah, work doesn't get on it. All right, let's say it gets on at number 4. Are you putting number 1 1? Are you putting number 2 2? Or where are you putting your energy?
Yeah, not even close. My list would be my
Yeah,
list would be like completely inverse. It would be awful.
e- exactly. I was just
Yeah.
talking to someone yesterday about the book, The Subtle Art Not to Give of an F. And
Do we have a dump button? Do we have a bleep
yeah,
button?
right. Dump. I don't even know. But in general, like the whole concept of the book is there's only so many fucks to give.
Yeah.
And let's just say you have 10 to give.
Hmm.
You're going to give 5 to work. You let
Yeah.
work get the majority of your energy.
Hmm.
And not only are you going to let work get all the energy, you're going to give some to Kelly. You're going to give some to Tuffy. When's Frank getting some energy?
That's part of it too. Yeah.
I talk about, I've been writing about like the concept of balance and how we are very fortunate to grow up in a very nurturing environment, um more nurturing time of history than our parents that were just told to suck it up, nothing's wrong, rub some dirt
Hmm.
on it.
Hmm.
But with that, we learned a lot of resiliency from our parents and that generation that like built this mental toughness, which to a certain point, and even as an arrogant man, and every man is like, oh, I can power through this, right? I got the mental toughness, but when are you pumping the brakes and having the conversation with your wife? And so that balance is a fickle bitch, but
Yeah.
it's
It
important.
is. It's hard, man. I mean, you're spot on, right? Like how many times? But very to give a practical example, it's like how many times is it? All right, I'm gonna work late tonight. Like I'm
Yeah,
gonna I'll pull an all nighter, or I'll stay up late and I'll finish what I need to. It's like in your mind you're thinking it's like yeah I can get like I got this and tomorrow I'll be fine because I'll. But no, it's like it's like a vacuum that constantly gets filled. Like
yeah,
you can't get through it. Like it'll just be the next thing, the new thing, and you're just constantly right back to square one, which is what I experienced this year. It was, um, yeah, it was a big learning year. There's
yeah.
a lot of things that I think I've witnessed from afar that I got to kind of experience firsthand.
Well, I mean, it seems like you learned quickly, and you're open to learning. And a lot of people can't say the same, and they probably wouldn't even have had that conversation with their wife this time.
Hmm.
What has it been, a year, over a year, whatever? You've been
Hmm.
open about it, working about it, and that shows a lot about your character. But
Yeah.
um, I commend you on that, and I'm proud of you. Um, but let's end with this. I feel like that's a trait that needs to be replicated. what's kind of like a 30-second little tip for everyone that they can maybe work on or take away from that recognition piece, or even, that piece we were talking about earlier, being a friend and in support, just to kind of wrap it up there, because I feel like it's very valuable.
I would say I'm gonna try and coin it as like individual honesty. It's like be honest, but be honest for your individual self. And
Yeah.
because I think there's two things that go into that. What you're feeling or how you feel, what you're experiencing, may probably doesn't match exactly with how someone else will perceive it. So your situation may feel really heavy and you feel really like badly, but
Hmm.
you might explain, I'm going through XYZ to someone who has a different set of tools and a different circumstance, and they're going to think that's not too bad. It would,
Yeah.
or they might think, oh man, I don't even know how you can get through. And both reactions aren't really ideal, but I think it's just a matter of like just trying to have that honest conversation. So for yourself, from the recognition standpoint, it's be honest. Like be honest. Where are you spending your time? How do you feel? What do you need? Like what do you need to feel better? Is whatever it is, say it. Say it to your loved one. Say it to your friend, and then vice versa. If you're that friend and you're trying to help, well, be honest. Try and be uncomfortably honest. Like in my perspective, this makes me uncomfortable. I don't know how to talk to you about this. How can I best talk to you about this?
Hmm.
It's so hard. It's hard for me. I struggle with it every time. That's the one thing I'm learning is just to try and be honest because I don't like conflict. So I'm constantly just, it's so hard to be honest, but sometimes you gotta be honest.
Yeah, I think that's a concept that everyone should adapt. Oh my God, think about the world we would be in.
Yeah.
Well, let's leave it this. I'm going to challenge you with one thing. What video game are you going to start playing more in 2024? Because I know that's something you like to do to escape. You like to have your prank
That's a
time. Forget it.
listen.
Shut the
Anyone who
blinds.
anyone who knows me knows I'm a big supporter of video games. I think they're fantastic for mental well being. It's like a gas valve on the brain. Um, I don't know. Right now, I probably would say Starfield. That'll be it. Yeah.
All right. The next time you come on, which will be in the new year, we're going to do a check-in of uh of your video game playing and how you've done that and how it's impacted your well-being, because
Yeah.
I know that's a part of
It is
your
big.
repertoire.
It is big. It is big. It can sometimes get bad, but it is for the most part it's good.
Very good. Well, Frank, love you, man. I appreciate everything you've done for me, man. You've been best friend, dictionary, picture of you, Al, everyone else. It's been a blessing, and excited for the years we have in the
Love you
future.
too, man. It's a pleasure.
All right, let's keep climbing. All right, thanks everyone for joining. We'll get to you next time.